Talk with anyone in Hollywood long enough, and you will learn a few things that are above what you think happens when it comes to making a TV show or a movie. And one of the biggest ones have to do with makeup and special effects. Because while basic makeup isn't that hard to do per se, depending on the character's looks, when you go into shows like The Vampire Diaries, which has supernatural characters and elements, it gets a bit more complicated. And apparently over the years there were quite a few stories about how things weren't as easy as they were supposed to be. So allow us to show you Vampire Diaries cast painful makeup and costume transformations.
I told her nothing.
Do not lie to me!
Making coffee. Do you want some?
Number 6, I Won't Bite. Obviously, when you have a show about vampires, one of the most important things you need to have is that of the fangs. After all, that's one of the vampire's visual calling cards, and in mythology, it is those fangs sinking into you that will not only kill you, but potentially transform you into a vampire depending on lore. Now you might wonder how these fangs feel when a character is getting bitten in a scene. The irony is that they don't feel like much, mainly because of their construction. Obviously, they're not real teeth, but are in fact simple and harmless casts that are perfectly constructed for each and every cast member, so that they fit perfectly and look menacing while on camera. And given that they did this for a bunch of seasons, they had plenty of time to go and perfect the process. But when it came to actually biting someone, the teeth wouldn't feel like much as they weren't that hard. The only thing that had to be worried about was the teeth falling out before the bite could be done, or after the bite had been initiated. However, there was another downside to the fangs. Number 5, the vampire voice. Your voice is a much more complicated thing than you realize. It is based on not just your vocal cords, but how your mouth is positioned when you try and speak. If someone is obstructing your mouth, your voice is affected. Same as if there are gaps in your mouth, like with your teeth and such. So why are we telling you this? Well, have you ever watched The Vampire Diaries and noticed that we honestly don't see much of the vampire's fangs unless it's a moment of intense action or something of the like? There's a very basic reason for that. The entire cast admitted that if they had their vampire fangs in their mouth, they couldn't speak like they normally do. They were known to give the cast a lisp due to how it changed their mouths as a whole. And one of the cast members even admitted that she couldn't speak as a whole when they were in her mouth. This obviously is a big problem because they're vampires and have to sound a certain way, and then sounding regular one take and with a lisp or other impediments when in vampire mode is indeed not ideal. So pay attention to that next time when you watch Vampire Diaries, will you? Number 4, wounds and gore. One of the things that made the Vampire Diaries so intense in the eyes of many was that it didn't go and hold back on the carnage that was done by the vampires and other members of the cast. But what gets lost in all the literal bloodbaths and bites that were done in the series is the hard work that was put into each moment by the people in the effects department. For example, there were obviously a lot of people who needed a lot of bite mark wounds put upon them. Simple enough, right? Well, no. It was actually a process that had to be done repeatedly in order to get the look right. They would mix in rubber prosthetics and makeup to try and make everything look real, which, to be clear, is not an easy thing to do. Nor is it something that you can do quickly, but they did it every time they needed it, which was often. And then there's the hearts. The signature move of most of the vampires was to rip out the hearts of their enemies. It's straight out of Mortal Kombat, and it's totally a mic drop moment. Obviously, the hearts were fake, but there was one case where it did happen for real. It was Joseph Morgan who played Klaus. He went and had to take a bite out of one of the hearts in a scene that was definitely a key moment of the series. Thankfully for him, the effects department made him a vegan heart, no kidding, so that he could go and get it done. The things we do for realism, right? Number 3, blood. Lots of blood. This is one that almost got the cast seriously sick in a way that you're not expecting, because obviously, just like many other things in the show, the blood that you see in the Vampire Diaries is fake. Not exactly a big surprise there, but given that there was so much of it virtually every single episode, you have to wonder what the stuff honestly was. The answer? Corn syrup. Yep, that's all it was, just syrup mixed with some red food dye, some salt in order to help it last a little bit longer, and some peppermint extract. Now why the last one? Well, if you're going to be chugging various amounts of blood during the season, it might as well be sweet as it goes down into your system, right? Exactly. And to be clear, it didn't stop there in terms of the chemistry. According to the crew, they had to not only make this fake blood in large quantities, but they had to go and make 5 different variations of it in order to help accentuate certain scenes, like close-ups and the kind of stains they want on clothes. The problem though is for the leading men, especially Ian, it was hurting his body because he was constantly chugging sugar. Some even worried they would get diabetes because of all the sugar they were literally pouring into their systems. Just as frustrating though is that they had to go and be really careful with the blood while acting with it on their bodies, because if it got onto their clothes, it was really hard to get out, and most clothes with the bloodstains would only be used for one take before being thrown out. And you probably thought the blood work was the easy part of it all, right? Wrong. Number 2, eyes and veins. Aside from the fangs, one of the parts of the signature look of the vampires in the show was that of their eyes and the veins that would emerge when they went into a rage. Now you may think this was a simple process of putting in contacts and using special makeup for the veins, but it's a lot more complex and painful than that. For example, with the eyes, they did indeed use special red contact lenses, ones that had to be put in by the makeup personnel when the scene was needed. But as many of the cast have noted, it was very painful because the contact lens covered the whole eye and made it hard to look through them and even move the eye at all. One cast member admitted they cried like a baby whenever the lens got put in, and another said it was like having 20 eyelashes in your eye that you can't get out. As for the veins under the eyes, this was a very complex process put in by the visual effects team. So much so that only light makeup was put on the cast to start off the look, and the rest was done digitally. They went deep into making these veins seem like their own character, so you'll notice if you pay attention to them the next go around. Number 1, pre-show looks. How much freedom do you think the cast had behind the scenes when it came to their looks when they weren't filming? Answer: not a lot, because their characters had a set look, and thus them going and changing their looks for their own personal pleasure was strictly forbidden. This included using certain kinds of makeup off camera and even going down to how they treated their nails. Part of the reason for this is that it would take hours for the cast to get ready for the shoots in terms of hair, face, and body makeup. And so having non-approved makeup or other things be added upon them would take up more time and thus lead to delays in filming, which was not desired in the least. So yeah, they had a strict diet of being very natural off set. Who knew? So what do you think? What do you think of this look at the Vampire Diaries and how things went in the makeup chair and beyond in order to help achieve the look of the show? Are you surprised by how some of these stories went? Did you not expect the actors to have to go through so much just so they could act on the show? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you next time on the channel.